Everyone says you have to shoot in RAW if you want the very best possible image quality, but what if that's not entirely true? On my recent workshop in Colorado, I captured two identical photos of this scene here, one in RAW and one in JPEG. Same camera, same setting, same light, everything identical except the file format. Now the main difference between these two is that a RAW file, it captures all the unprocessed data straight from the camera sensor, while a JPEG is a compressed, pre-edited version that really throws away a lot of that information in order to keep the file smaller. In other words, RAW gives you flexibility, JPEG gives you convenience. So today I'm going to edit the RAW photo and copy the exact edits over to the JPEG to see just how big of a difference there really is. Can a well-exposed JPEG actually hold its own against a RAW file, or will it completely fall apart once the editing starts? So this is the scene right here, shot during sunset in southwest Colorado. Beautiful evening light, incredible fall color, and a mirror-like reflection. I shot this exact composition twice, one in RAW and one in JPEG, both straight out of my Nikon Z8 using the same settings, ISO 100, f11 with a shutter speed of 1/40th of a second. Each photo taken exactly 18 seconds apart. The only difference between these two files is the format. Everything else absolutely identical. The RAW file is 57 megabytes and the much smaller JPEG is just 15 megabytes. So let's start right here. So this right here, as I open up, this is the .nef, this is a Nikon RAW file, and this right here is the JPEG. And I'll kind of toggle back and forth and you can see the files change up here. So this is RAW, this is the JPEG, this is the RAW, this is the JPEG. Not a massive difference right out of the gate, but there is a difference here. So let's come up to the RAW file. Let's go over here to the develop panel, go to the basics section, and let's start with the highlights. So I'm actually gonna, instead of taking the highlights down, I'm gonna take the highlights up because I really wanna see how the files compare up here in these brighter areas. So I'm gonna take the highlights to +100. Let's come up here to the JPEG, go to +100, and let's compare these two. So let me go back to the library section and compare these two. So this on the left is the JPEG, this on the right is the RAW. Let me click on this right here and you can look and really let this load, but you can start to see a difference. Let's zoom in a little bit further here. So it looks like the RAW file actually, and this is to be expected here, one of the biggest differences in RAW versus JPEG is RAW gives you a lot more dynamic range. And you can really see this here when I push the exposure up. It looks like the detail is much better in the RAW file compared to JPEG. RAW files store much more dynamic range, as I mentioned, especially in the brighter tones. So when you pull the highlight slider up or down, RAW often recovers these brighter areas or handles these areas much better than a JPEG. And you can definitely see that right here. As I kind of move this around a little bit, there definitely is a difference right there. So let's go back to the library. Obviously, I'm not gonna want to take those highlights to +100, but in essence of time, let's just hold on the shift key, double click highlights, let Lightroom make the adjustment, and it says -67. And let's come over here to the shadows now. Let's bring this up to +100. I'm gonna go over to the JPEG. Let's take this to -67, just like the RAW file. And let's take the shadows all the way up to 100. And let's compare the difference here. I chose this photo for a very specific reason. One, it's an absolutely beautiful fall scene in Colorado, but there's very bright areas and there's some deep shadows, so it's kind of a perfect image to do this comparison on. So let's highlight this, let's do the compare right here, and let's zoom into some of these areas up here and just take a look as we just kind of snoop around a little bit. This is at shadows +100. RAW photos contain far more tonal data in the shadows, so when you raise the shadows or exposure, RAW retains smooth gradation while JPEG introduces sometimes visible noise and banding. But honestly, they both look fairly good to me. The JPEG file looks a little bit more detailed right through here, a little bit more contrast, and you got to remember the JPEG file has already been kind of pre-edited inside of the camera, so there's kind of sharpening and detail that's already added to it. But as far as just overall shadow recovery, I think they both look pretty good, which honestly is a little bit surprising. I thought you'd see a substantial difference here, but you really don't. I'm gonna come up here to the RAW file once again and just kind of swing this back and forth so you can see that. And then we'll make the more appropriate edit. Let's just take the shadows to +63. This is the JPEG file now. Swing this back and forth. And honestly, that JPEG file is recovering a lot of shadow detail, which is fairly surprising. So let's just take that to +67 as well. And I did use the very best JPEG setting that the Nikon Z8 offers. I think it's called JPEG Fine, which is the largest JPEG file that the Nikon Z8 can create. So let's go back here to the RAW file and let's go over here to to white balance. So I'm gonna zoom in on an area here to select my white balance, take the eyedropper, try and find something neutral, which this looks pretty neutral. You can see that the red value is 45, the green value is 45, and the blue is 44.5. You really wanna kind of keep all three of those values very close to one another. That's a good neutral target. So let's select that right there, and it made an adjustment. Now what you'll see on the JPEG file is it doesn't retain that white balance adjustment. You can see that they're both at 0 and it's set as shot right now. So in order to mimic what I did on the raw file, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna highlight both of these, right click, develop settings, sync settings. I'm gonna set check none, and let's come over here to white balance and hit synchronize. And let's see, so this is the raw file. You can see what the white balance was. Temperature 5500, tint 21, and now it has temperature -2 and tint +5. I'm not sure exactly how accurate of a comparison that is between the raw, but let's go ahead and just set the white balance of the JPEG individually. Grab the eyedropper, find that neutral target again, select that, and +2, +3, and I think that looks okay. Now let's come over here to the calibration section. Let's start with the raw file. So let me open up calibration here. And I'll start to kind of do my normal calibration update that I kind of do on most photos. So we'll take the blue primary, bring this up maybe to 25. Since it's a fall photo, let's just kind of reduce the hue a little bit. Let's do the green primary +20, the red primary +21, that's fine. Come over here and let's sync these together again. So highlight this, develop settings and sync settings. And now let's also include calibration. Where are you? Synchronize. Okay, that looks okay. Now they're both definitely very blue. The JPEG is even more blue because once again, that JPEG file is pre-edited, so it's got probably a lot of saturation and vibrance applied to it. So let me come back up here to the raw file now. Raw files usually capture that unprocessed sensor data, giving you really full control of white balance, hue, and saturation, where that JPEG is, all that information is kind of baked in with color profiles, meaning any temperature or tint or white balance change or any kind of change really can usually break down that image fairly quickly. But let's come over here to color mixer. I don't want nearly that much blue in the sky there. I think that looks pretty good. I think overall the colors are starting to get a little bit overdone, so let's bring that vibrance down to maybe -15 right there. And let's make a white point adjustment, let's make a black point adjustment, and I think that looks pretty good there. And now let's compare these. So let me select them, develop settings, sync settings once again. I'm just gonna come over here and select check all and synchronize and kind of let it do its thing. And as you can see, I find it easier to see when I toggle them back and forth. So this is raw, JPEG, raw, and JPEG. There is a difference, but quite frankly, not quite as big of a difference as I would expect at this point. We really haven't pushed the edit super hard yet. We're gonna do that in just a moment here. So now I'm gonna come back here to develop, and let's take the texture of the raw file to 100. Let's take the clarity to 100, and let's do the same thing to the JPEG. JPEG compression applies, a fair amount of noise reduction and sharpening in camera. That means you can't fully undo it in aggressive edits, and sometimes it can have exaggerated artifacts and banding and maybe some kind of halos in certain areas. So let's see if we're able to recreate that. So texture to +100, clarity to +100. Yeah, ooh, that looks kind of rough there. Not that I would normally do that anyway, but let's just see. Let's highlight these and let's zoom in and see here. So this is the raw file on the left, JPEG on the right. Give them a few moments to load. And as expected, the JPEG, it looks even more crunchy, even more sharp because that already has sharpening applied to it. And it doesn't look nearly as smooth as the raw file does. Let's kind of just scroll through here a little bit, look at this ridge line. I can kind of see a little bit of haloing occurring in the JPEG, but it's not too bad. It's fairly controlled. So I'm gonna come back up here now to the raw file, and let's just make the my normal adjustment. So I always do +15 on the texture and usually -20 on the clarity just to kind of soften things down just a little bit right there. So I'm gonna add some contrast here as well to the raw file and maybe increase the exposure a little bit. Now let's apply some masks. Let's kind of push this a little bit further to see if we can make that JPEG file break down even more. Although I can see definitely some differences between the two, but it's not nearly as big of a difference as I honestly thought there would be. So I'm gonna come over here. First, I'm gonna add a vignette to this. So let's do maybe -13. Come up here to mask. Let's draw a linear gradient across the top here. And let's just bring that down full stop. And let's do another mask plus linear gradient. Let's drag one down here as well. Let's darken this some, maybe a full stop as well. Let's do one more mask. Let's do a radial gradient right through the center here, a big one. Not that tall, Mark. Like that, and all the way across like this. Let's bring that exposure a little bit, because this area here, this is the real star of the show. Those trees and the bones of the trees, the trunks, look absolutely beautiful, and I really want to show that off. So let's bring the exposure up, let's bring the shadows up, let's bring the white point up, maybe even kind of warm that up a little bit more to something about right there. Maybe even can make it a little bit larger to something, I'd say that looks pretty good. Come up here to library. Let's sync these edits now and see what happens. So right click, develop settings, sync settings, select, everything is selected. You can see all of those masks are selected, the vignettes selected. Let's hit synchronize. It's made its adjustment here. And now let's compare. So this right here is the RAW file. This right here is the JPEG file. So RAW, JPEG, RAW, JPEG. So since the JPEG file has contrast already built into it, I'm gonna reduce this contrast a little bit as well to something about like this. I think looks good, and let's just see what this looks like if we compare these two together now. So this right here is RAW, JPEG, RAW, and JPEG. There is a difference, but honestly, it's not that bad, really. I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna do my normal, kind of my standard sharpening technique as well. So let's come up here to detail, take this sharpening to 100. Let's take the radius to 1.5. Detail to 75, and then since I applied a lot of sharpening to it, I masked most of it out. Bring this up to about 90 right here. So come back up here, library. Let's sync these one more time. Develop settings, sync settings. Everything once again is selected. Let's hit synchronize. Let's just hit merge here. All right, let's zoom in now. Oh, I gotta hit compare. Zoom in, and let's just see how this is handling things now. The JPEG should probably look overly detailed now because it already had sharpening applied to it, and we just applied more sharpening to it. And yeah, you can definitely see kind of a halo up here, some artifacting along the ridge lines. It's not quite as smooth as the RAW file, but honestly, all in all, it definitely looks pretty good. Like I mentioned, going into this, I really thought the JPEG file would completely fall apart. It would blow up. It would be just a complete mess. It honestly handled it pretty good. I've never done this kind of test before, but it's always been something in the back of my mind, and I thought about it on my recent trip to Colorado. But once again, let's toggle these back and forth so you can easily see them. So this right here is the RAW file, and this right here is the JPEG, RAW, JPEG. If I shot this in JPEG only, obviously I would edit the JPEG a little bit differently than I would edit the RAW file, but using the exact RAW edits and applying them to the JPEG, I don't think they look too bad. They have a little bit more color than I like to it, but I did that on purpose to really push the file. But overall, I think the RAW file definitely has more kind of tonal smoothness. It definitely looks like a smoother file than the JPEG right here. So even though both versions started out looking almost identical straight out of camera, as soon as you start editing, the differences become fairly obvious. The RAW file just gives you more flexibility, smoother gradients, cleaner shadows, and actually a far better highlight recovery. You can really push it around and change the white balance and still end up with a very natural looking image. The JPEG, on the other hand, kind of shows its limits the moment you start making heavier adjustments. The colors get weird a little bit, details start to crumble a little bit, halos and artifacts, and you just don't have that same headroom. But here's the thing, if you nail your exposure and you don't plan on doing much editing, JPEGs obviously can still look fantastic. The color and contrast right out of camera are often great, especially with how good modern sensors and color profiles have gotten. So it's not about one being right and the other being wrong, it's about understanding the trade-off. RAW gives you control, JPEG gives you convenience. Personally, I'm gonna stick with RAW for my landscape work because I want that flexibility. But if you're shooting something casual or you need quick results, JPEG is totally fine. So once again, this is the RAW file, this is the JPEG, RAW, JPEG, RAW, JPEG. I hope you enjoyed this week's video, something I've never done before, something I've always kind of wondered about. And it's a pretty interesting results in my opinion. If you have any questions about this week's video, if you could leave them in the comment section below. I'll be sure to get back in touch with you as soon as humanly possible. And if you enjoyed this week's video, if you could, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. And as always, I really do appreciate you carving out a little bit of time to spend it with me here today. And I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye.